webinar as well. Um, so welcome everybody. And thank you for joining today's event, during which we will launch a new report called Transnational Landlords, or the Lords of the Land, Transnational Landlords, Inequalities, and the Case for Redistribution. This is a report that we publish as FIAN International, together with Focus on the Global South, and also our event today is organized by those two organizations. My name is Philip, and I work with FIAN International. I'm one of the authors of the report, and we will hear from other people who have been involved in this report today during the event. We have translation, interpretation, so I hope that all of you can have chosen your language channel. Given that we have interpretation, I would invite all of us, especially our speakers firstly, but we have a question and answer sessions later on. So if you speak, please speak slowly. If possible, switch on your video. That will make the job easier for our interpreters and will help us to have a conversation all together. If you want, we also invite you to rename yourselves indicating your name and your affiliation. I think that is also good that we know who is on the webinar, and later on, especially for the Q&A session, we can know who is speaking. I will just very quickly run us through the today's program. So we will have a first part where we will look at the report. First of all, with Luciana Rolon, who will present it, and then Lim Li Ching, who will put it into context. We will then have a second part with some initial reflections from discussants, and I will introduce the speakers as they speak. The third part will have a short question-answer session, some back and forth to give you the possibilities also to ask questions. And then we will close with some final reflections at the end by Carlos Duarte, who is the Chair-Rapporteur of the UN Working Group on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. As I said, I will introduce people as they speak. I don't want to take too much time, but maybe just to share some background on the report that we presented today, and that is launched today, so it's available, and we will share the link in the chat as well so that you can access it. So we have what we did with this report is basically to try to identify who are the world's largest transnational landowners. So transnational means that landowners, entities that own or control land in more than one country, especially beyond their country of where they are headquartered. So one of the things we do in the report is to identify the biggest 10, and we will present them to you later on. But we also put this phenomenon of big transnational landowners into context of dynamics of land grabbing, resource grabbing, and increasing land concentration. And then we also try to link this to policy discussions that are more related to land, but also including making the linkages to ongoing discussions around food, climate, and especially also questions around financing for development and taxation and these aspects. Because we see that we're still oftentimes these topics are dealt with too much in kind of silos. And so our report, among other things, also tries to kind of make these connections as a proposal and as a first step to kind of have further cross-fertilization between actors that are working in different areas. I should say that this is a collective report. I already said that it's two organizations, FIAN and Focus on the Global South, publishing it, but many people were involved in the research phase, providing information, especially also members of small-scale food producers organizations, social movements. Yeah, this is kind of, we see this much of a collective effort, and it also builds on a previous report that we did a few years ago where we tried to unpack what is going on around land, especially in the context of financialization of land and territories. With that, I would just give over to Luciana to present the main findings of the report. So Luciana Rolon, she's one of the authors of the report, and she was the lead researcher. She's an economist from Argentina. She holds a master's degree in economic development from the National University of San Martin. And yeah, she combines macroeconomic, financial, and sectoral analysis with a critical feminist economics perspective, both in public sector and applied research. And so Luciana will present us some of the findings of the report. Luciana, please go ahead. You have the word.
Okay. Hi, good morning. Well, here in Argentina, it's morning. First of all, I want to thank FIAN for organizing the space of dialogue and all the participants and everyone who's joined the conversation today. I'm going to share the presentation. No, I'm sorry. Here. Well, this report, as Philip said, identifies the world's top 10 transnational landowners, including agribusiness, forestry giants, and financial actors like asset managers and pension funds. This work also emerges from a central concern that is increasing global concentration of land driven by financialization and speculation, and its impacts in inequality, in environmental destruction, and food sovereignty. I will briefly explain how we build the ranking of the companies and the main insights and some policy recommendations. Sorry. But first, what's behind this pattern of accumulation? Since the 2008 global financial crisis, land has been increasingly treated as a financial asset, a hedge against inflation with stable long returns. This trend has only intensified with the overlapping crisis in food, energy, climate, and finance. So new actors and instruments emerged: pension funds, asset managers, real asset funds, carbon markets, and so on. So we saw a sharp rise in international land investments, especially in the global south, and frequently through opaque ownership structures, also associated with large-scale and tech-intensive farming and land transformation and leasing services and conservation projects. As a result, land concentrations has intensified dramatically. Today, 70% of the world's farmland is controlled by just 1% of the largest firms. Meanwhile, the vast majority of farms, those under 2 hectares, have access to just 12% of the world's farmland. Here are some graphics. This graphic shows the stability on and long-term value of farmland, that is the dotted line, against other assets. And we see the steady growth. And this one is another graphic that shows investment in farmland. The green square in the top left also offers high returns and less volatility than traditional assets like stocks and bonds and other commodities. This information is from TIA Nuveen, one of the biggest pension funds in US, and they show also that farmland has consistently outpaced inflation with lower risk and traditional assets since 1991. Well, despite this growing importance, there is a critical lack of public information about who the main owners of agricultural land in the world are, how much land they control, and how they operate. So this report seeks to fill that gap, providing essential evidence to better understand these dynamics. Well, about our methodology, we focus on, as we said before, transnational corporate and financial actors that control agricultural land as well as land used for forestry and bioeconomy. We rank them by hectares control, since it's a metric that can be compared across regions. Other variables like invested capital are harder to standardize and often unavailable. We concentrate on legal ownership and long-term concessions, as these are easier to verify and relevant for discussions on regulation and redistribution. We use what we call a puzzle methodology, cross-verifying data from different sources, academic, NGO, and media studies, global databases like Land Matrix, corporate and financial reports, and experts' interviews on academics, activists, journalists, and officials. Well, from this, we consolidate a list of transnational companies with significant land holdings, and we validate the figures with official company data. We also share this information with the companies involved and included their comments when they replied. It's also important to mention some methodological choices and limitations. We focus on transnational actors, excluding domestic companies, since they have been the main drivers of land accumulation in recent decades. We also excluded sectors like mining, housing, and tourism due to the lack of available data. Well, so what this list shows us? There is an enormous concentration of land in just a few hands. 10 companies control over 40 million hectares, roughly the size of Japan, Zimbabwe, or Paraguay. Some of these companies have grown a lot in recent years, like Wilmar, Cresud, and TIA Nubin, which almost quadrupled their land since 2012. Also, if we add super rich individuals or big domestic companies owning land inside countries like Australia, Russia, US, the total is even bigger. The level of concentrations can influence policies and markets, posing serious risks to environment and food sovereignty. About the geography, we can say that half of these companies are based in rich countries like Global North and half in countries of the Global South. But most of the land, 80% they control, is actually in the Global South, showing a neocolonial dynamics of financial flows. It's also important to highlight the different policies, profiles. Landowners based in the Global South are mainly agribusiness, bioeconomy, and forestry companies that direct manage land, while those based in the Global North are primarily financial entities focused on generating capital gains. One striking case is Blue Carbon, the top of the list, which alone holds over half total land area in our dataset. It is a financial firm that focuses on carbon credits, was born in 2022, and is backed by a member of Dubai's royal family, whose business also happened to include investment in fossil fuels. In just a few years, the company has announced carbon credits projects covering 24.5 million hectares in countries in Africa, also Pacific, and in Caribbean. This case, and also Manulife, which call itself the world's second largest natural asset company, are clear examples that new investments in carbon markets and biodiversity are creating new ways of land grabbing and increasing inequality. They use complicated land deals like leases or exclusive rights that can dispose people indirectly and turn nature into a commodity. Others dynamics of finalization that we saw, for example, is that major asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard are shareholders in the several of the top 10 landowners. Also, we find that there is an increase of partnerships of giant agribusiness with asset managers to expand land ownership, and many of them are shifting investments toward rural real estate and land use conversion. Almost all of these landowners had been linked to land grabbing, human rights abuses, deforestation, and environmental damage. A widely cited case is TIA Nuveen connection with the deforestation of thousands of hectares in the Brasil Cerrado. In short, having so much land in few hands creates deep problems. It fuels speculation, drives up prices, and pushes land grabbing. Plus, this company use complex and secretive financial setups to hide what they really own, making it hard for authorities and communities to hold them accountable. So, well, these are some of the trends I mentioned earlier. To address these trends, we propose 4 lines of action. First, improve monitoring and data transparency. We need better data of who owns the land and how. More analysis on finalization and land investments. It's also key to analyze land grabbing, how land grabbing is transforming tenure systems and deepening inequality. In this regard, we think that stronger cooperation of the food and agriculture organization with UNDROP, for example, could help generate quality data. We also think that more participatory methodologies are needed to monitor land inequality, integrating perspective from local communities. And it's crucial to integrate also environmental impacts such as deforestation with just satellite tools. Second, strength, regulation and accountability. States must regulate land deals and hold corporations accountable for environment and human rights abuses. These measures should ensure transparency and responsibility across complex investment networks. Moreover, international cooperation is essential to build legally binding instruments that for regulate activities on transnational corporations. Third, implement progressive taxation. While landowners and wealthy individuals, large corporations have benefited from tax loopholes and neoliberal policies that have drastically reduced corporate and capital tax rates. To tackle this, we urgent need to taxes on land, wealth, and emissions, combined with international cooperation to combat illicit financial flows and ensure fiscal justice. That's why initiatives like UN Framework, Convention on International Tax Cooperation, and the proposed Convention on Sovereign Debt are crucial on this debate. I'm sorry. And fourth, we need to reactive agrarian reform. Fiscal policies alone aren't enough without addressing the structure of land ownership. Agrarian reform has historically been essential to confronting inequality and securing land rights. We need to reactivate policies to stop and reverse land concentration, including expropriating lands linked to tax havens, human rights abuses. Also the upcoming conference of agrarian reform and rural development in Colombia next year is a strategic moment to coordinate these efforts. Well, finally, what we are trying to say here is that land concentration is not inevitable. It's a result of political decisions, weak regulatory frameworks, and a system that prioritizes financial returns over human rights. And we believe that urgent action is needed to address this. So thank you very much for your attention, and well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Luciana, for kind of giving us a short glimpse of the report and of some of the main topics, and also for pulling out some of the findings that also we found particularly interesting and pressing, and I think also we will come back later on also on the different levels of kind of on what like multi-sectoral interventions that will be necessary to address those problems. You have already started a bit to zoom out, or to let us understand that obviously this phenomenon of huge land accumulation by transnational actors is like not an isolated phenomenon, but is kind of part of a broader dynamics and trends around land. And I would like to invite Ching to speak a bit more about this broader context. Ching is the co-chair of IPES-Food, and she's also a senior researcher at the Third World Network, which is an international policy and research advocacy NGO based in Malaysia. And Ching has also extensive experience on issues related to biodiversity, biosafety, climate, sustainable agriculture, also participating in some intergovernmental processes. So Ching, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I've been asked to situate the report within broader trends of land grabbing and increasing land concentration. Just going to check that you can see my screen.
We can see it, but it's, I think you have to switch to the slideshow mode.
Okay. I put it in the slideshow. Are you able to see it now?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm having the same problem I had earlier. I don't know why it's, let me just try one more time. Does it work now?
We still see your full screen, not presentation mode. So.
Okay. Do you want to try on your side, Philip? Because I put it into slideshow. It's in slideshow on my screen, but somehow it doesn't seem to be working in your side. Apologies for that.
Okay, let me just... Okay, I hope you can see my screen full screen now. Does that work? Ching, do you see it?
Yeah, I see it again in not in slideshow, but if others can see it in slideshow, then that's fine. Shall we just
Yeah, I think you can start.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So thank you again for inviting me to speak here. So in order to situate the lords of the land in this increasing trend of land grabbing and land concentration, I want to present key findings of an IPES-Food report called The Land Squeeze. And basically, what we see here is in the report that Luciana has talked about, is really a manifestation of what is unprecedented. And it's a land squeeze that is threatening farmers, food production, and ultimately the viability of peasant agriculture. The next slide, please. Now, what we're seeing is land grabbing escalating dangerously in new and varying forms. And land concentration is rising in all regions and reaching unprecedented levels. I'm not sure if the slide has changed, Philip.
It has changed for me. I don't know if
Okay. I see that participants saying it's not moved.
Okay. That's
Yes, I see it now. I hope that's, yes, okay, that's great. So what you can see here is really land concentration rising in all regions and reaching unprecedented levels. And basically, 70% of the world's farmland is now controlled by just 1% of the world's largest farms. And land around twice the size of Germany has been snatched up in transnational deals worldwide since 2000. And communities are the ones that are being squeezed from all sides. They're losing their lands, livelihoods, and culture and rural traditions, while young farmers face huge barriers to access land to farm. If you go to the next slide, please. We found 4 key trends driving the land squeeze today across the world. What we're calling land grabbing 2.0, green grabbing, expansion and encroachment, and food systems reconfiguration. And this land squeeze is really eroding meaningful access and control over land for farmers, pastoralists, indigenous peoples, and marginalized groups, undermining livelihoods and threatening food security. We also looked at some of the underlying root causes of this, which I won't get to in this presentation, but I'm going to focus on these 4 trends. If you go to the next slide, please. The first trend, or the first driver, we call land grabbing 2.0, where large tracts of land are swallowed up every year. And land ownership, as Luciana has mentioned, is increasingly transferred from farmers to financial actors through new waves of land grabs. Of course, land grabbing has been around since the 2007-2008 financial crisis. But we've seen since the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, a renewed push to secure land for export commodity production. And the trend that we're seeing is that agribusinesses, investors, governments are finding new ways to unlock and appropriate farmland, mainly by deregulating land markets and accelerating speculative investments. So land is increasingly appropriated through special economic zones and growth corridors in the context of pro-investor bilateral investment treaties and free trade agreements. As was highlighted in the earlier presentation, land is being grabbed primarily now to be turned into a financial asset. So powerful actors are flooding into increasingly financialized land markets. So from 2005 to 2017, some $45 billion was invested in farmland by large institutional actors like pension funds. And these agricultural investment funds have risen tenfold and now include farmland as a standalone asset class, with US investors doubling their stakes since the pandemic. And of course, one of the top 10 entities that was pointed out, TIAA, is now the world's largest landowner with more than 1 million hectares worldwide. And we see a direct correlation between this increased speculation of farmland and rising prices for land. And in Brazil, for example, states experiencing the greatest investor speculation saw an average 200% increase in land prices from 2008 to 2017. Now, on the slide is just to give you an idea of the scale and the role that land ownership plays in the portfolios of major investors, which start to drive up the price of land because as it becomes a speculative activity, and farmers that are renting the land can no longer afford to stay, and entrant farmers are not allowed in. If you turn to the next slide, please, you see this increasing amount and scale of land deals, transnational land deals, that come actually at the expense of small and medium farmers. If you go to the next slide, please. The second major driver of this increasing land concentration and land grabbing is what we call green grabbing. Now, this phenomenon is rising very fast. And essentially, it takes lands away from communities and redirects resources from global south to north. Green grabbing occurs when governments and corporations appropriate communal or smallholders' land for large-scale tree planting, carbon offsetting, and top-down conservation projects, or even for so-called clean fields. Now, already green grabs account for 20% of documented large-scale land deals. And as pointed out earlier, blue carbon, right, which was the top entity in the list, 25 million hectares of land in 5 African countries have been snapped up by just this one firm, and in very recent years, in the last 3 years. And primarily for carbon offsets and to speculate in the carbon market. So land is grabbed for carbon offsets based on the idea that planting new trees can offset emissions or compensates for deforestation elsewhere. But actually, it isn't technically possible for nature or trees to just suck up all the carbon that is released from the burning of fossil fuels, nor will it do so in the long timescales that matter to the climate. There's no equivalence between the atmospheric carbon cycle and the geological time cycle, carbon cycle, right? So what's in the terrestrial level and geologically is very different, because it takes, very short time to release tons and tons of fossil fuels into the atmosphere, but to actually suck it down and to put it back into geologic timescale is impossible, right? But despite this scientific problems, governments still are looking to land-based carbon removals to try and meet their so-called net zero targets. And their pledges for land-based carbon removals add up to almost 1.2 billion hectares of land, equivalent to total global cropland. And half of these pledges interfere with indigenous and small farmers' lands, likely increasing land conflicts. Now, carbon offset markets are facilitating huge land transactions, bringing farmland and forests under the control of major polluters. These markets were valued at $414 billion in 2023 and are projected to rise to $1.8 trillion by 2030. One fossil fuel multinational, Shell, has set aside more than $450 million for offsetting projects. And research shows that there are actually millions of so-called phantom credits that don't actually represent genuine carbon reductions. So carbon offsets don't reduce carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, but what it does is it detracts from the urgent need for deep and sustained emission reductions, and it provides the opportunity for large transnationals like Shell to claim that they are reducing their emissions when they are in fact not. So in other words, greenwashing. And we have a phenomenon now of biodiversity offsets and credits, which are now being promoted. A very similar market mechanism, which looks to conservation or restoration actions that are calculated as being equivalent to biodiversity destruction in one place and then implemented elsewhere to compensate for that destruction. But much like carbon markets, they can create conflicts over tenure rights and land use and compete with agroecology and smallholder agriculture, undermining food sovereignty. And they will likely drive more land grabbing, community displacements, and increasing land inequality and human rights abuses. Next slide, please. This is just to show that the land-climate-food nexus works in a vicious cycle with feedback loops. But the end result is the same. Land is taken away from communities, especially small-scale food producers, indigenous peoples, peasants, and pastoralists, who already bear the brunt of climate change, and therefore perpetuates a very highly inequitable situation. The next slide, please. The third driver that we looked at was encroachment and expansion. And encroachment refers to large tracts of land being taken out of agriculture, repurposed for extractive industries, including critical minerals and mega developments. Already, approximately 6.6 million hectares of land is used for mining globally, an area the size of Sri Lanka. And mining projects accounted for 14% of recorded large-scale land deals over the past 10 years, swallowing up some 7.7 million hectares of farmland. A majority of these projects take place in indigenous peoples and local communities' lands. But instead of protecting communities, what we have seen is that dubious investment laws that are pro-investor protect the polluters, protect the extractivists. And for example, several TNCs have successfully sued the Colombian government for attempting to halt a large-scale mining project. And finally, we also have prime farmland lost to urbanization and mega infrastructure developments. And the UN estimates that by 2030, up to 3.3 million hectares of the world's farmland could be swallowed up by megacities, with 80% of this happening in Africa and Asia. Next slide, please. The final driver that we looked at was what we call food systems reconfiguration. Because we're not just seeing land grabs, we're seeing farmers losing control of land, of what is grown and how they farm. And that control of land is effectively handed over to global industrial food system by stealth. Basically, we see a spread of industrial agriculture based on input-intensive feed crop monocultures and factory farms squeezing out smallholders. And as agriculture becomes more mechanized, specialized, and reliant on expensive digital and genetic technologies, the less smallholder farmers can afford to farm. And agribusiness mergers are creating giant dominant firms, which pursue highly monopolistic practices, driving up costs for farmers and undermining their control over land and food production. By 2020, Syngenta controlled 1/4 of the global pesticides market, and just 4 firms controlled 50% of the market for seeds and 62% for pesticides. And market control and price gouging are common. For example, research has shown that leading firms did hike fertilizer prices well beyond production costs, so much so that in 2020, they made 36% more profit while selling less products. Now, all these dynamics are creating systematically economic precarity for farmers, effectively forcing them to get big or get out. So I'll turn to the next slide, please. Really just to wrap up and to conclude to say that these 4 major drivers that we're seeing, land grabbing, the new wave where financial actors are involved, green grabbing for so-called environmental purposes, but actually harm the environment and peoples, and encroachment through mining projects, for example, and food systems reconfiguration towards industrial agriculture are converging and squeezing small-scale food producers, indigenous peoples, pastoralists, peasants, and other rural communities from all sides. And so therefore, we have a dangerous interface between small-scale farmers on one side and powerful actors like institutional investors, pension funds, fossil fuel companies, and real estate developers on the other. And if we leave it unaddressed, there will be a tipping point which will deepen land inequality, exacerbate rural poverty, and squeeze sustainable forms of farming permanently out of business. So I won't go into addressing this crisis. I think we'll talk a lot more about this in the questions and answers. But what I would say is that we have identified some leverage points for change, and these are based on justice, really, on addressing structural barriers, as well as ensuring that there is actually redistributive forms of land and agrarian reform. I think I'll stop here because I'm probably over time. So thank you very much, Philip, and I'll pass back to you.
Thank you very much, Ching, for kind of giving us this broad overview. Now that we are have this full picture, we are moving into the second part of our today's webinar, where we will see a bit. We'll have 3 discussants discussing, reacting to what we have just presented, and then yeah, we will also move into a question and answer section. I think I particularly appreciated, Ching, also you for kind of pulling out and making the connections on these are kind of unpacking this broader nexus between land, food, climate, energy, also finance to some extent, and also, as Luciana had already said, that this is not like a natural state of affairs. It's the result of policies, of organizing our economies and of food policies, of different policies in the different sectors. And there are deep underlying structural issues. I think you made a very strong point at the end also of kind of focusing the responses on justice. So I hope that our next speakers, they will kind of go a bit into that direction. And the first one we have in the second part is Jhenifer Mojica, who is currently the ambassador of the permanent mission of Colombia to the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO, and other Rome-based agencies. She is a Colombian lawyer, a human rights defender, and a recognized expert in agrarian and environmental issues. And she was also, between May 2023 and July 2024, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development in Colombia. So, Jhenifer, thank you so much for being with us today. And yeah, we're looking forward to your comments, and especially also we're curious also to hear in what way also Colombia's proposal to organize the second International Conference on Agrarian Reform and Rural Development next February, it's kind of can be a step to identifying solutions to or responses to this situation. So please, Jhenifer, you have the floor.
Muy buenas tardes, buenos días, ¿me escuchan?
Good afternoon, good morning. Can you hear me
Yes,
well?
yes, the connection is not very good, but we can see and hear you. Please go ahead, Jhenifer.
Bueno, un saludo muy especial.
Okay, so very special greeting to FIAN International and Focus on the Global South and everyone who has been part of this research. I had the opportunity to read the reports, and I believe that we're facing one of the most challenging issues regarding policy, and is to face a multi-crisis where inequality, poverty is related also to deep climate change, and it really requires some changes in our lifestyle, because we need to advance into climate action and we need to feed millions of people in our different countries. So the recent report on food crisis by the ONU, and this report confirms once again the need to really move forward into really concrete actions to give an answer to poverty and hungerness, especially in the global south and the many countries that are going through wars. What is happening right now in Gaza, where hunger is a tool of war. So I believe this need for land has increased in inequality. And the report is showing this with the analysis of the top 10 companies that really are part of the land grabbing. The data is not, it says a lot that 1% of the land, of 1% of owners control 70% of land. So this brings alerts to the governments and multilateral agencies and to social organizations and also to the private sector. The relationship we have with land, with the land, we have our possibility to feed ourselves, to live, with these relationships that go further, focusing on money, but it really brings risks to national sovereignty. We have proved that this anxiety for land has gone into an speculative market of land, which pressures even more local communities about this possibility to access to these natural resources, land resources, and it has great consequences, environmental and social consequences on people. So this land grabbing that is related also to human rights violations and violations of environmental impacts really has to make us question what are we going to do to stop this situation. We've been analyzing throughout the last 20 years the data, that there's this phenomenon of land grabbing, but in this report we also have other perspectives, which is this green grabbing, when we're talking about climate actions and the need to invest into environmental services and carbon bonds, how they're also creating an unbalance and major pressure on land grabbing as a resource of how we can implement this environmental agenda. So it also says this report that land is a financial asset. So when we talk about land now as a financial asset, it really make the local farm workers, how there has been taken away from their own land. So what we mentioned also of land that is the size of Germany, land grabbing. The case of Colombia is not different. We've been suffering a pressure or an issue of land grabbing and lands that are very productive and lands that have been taken for extractivism, for carbon, and this is associated to mega projects that this is also the inclusion of urban expansion, but we depend on this land, on our food sovereignty of the country really depends on the land. So land that's been taken for cattling and deforestation in Colombia that is really connected to land grabbing is something that really makes the case for what the report says at international levels. We're in a process of land grabbing, including investors, and this is not transparent. They actually make use of this gap in policy, transnational policy, where the states are not complying with our duty to guarantee land, territory, and food to local communities from Colombia, we congratulate you that these recommendations are included. This conclusion is to talk about agrarian reform and other policies to redistribute land, to give an answer to this phenomenon. We cannot stay quiet because we know that what we've done so far is not enough. First, we need to talk about a package of public policies to stimulate responsible use of land, to also generate through tax exemptions the transformation of negative uses of land to uses that include transformation to sustainable ways of agriculture. So this will also help us give an answer to the problems that we've been having. So our agrarian reform that has 5 components: a process of understanding the registering of land. You know, we need to know who is owner of which land. This is an important path to peace. Second, to understand the rights of local communities and ethnic communities. We have moved forward to the recognizing the rights of farm workers or campesinos, and how to move forward into meeting those rights. But we really need to move faster so that judicial secureness can also give an answer to local communities. Third, a really important action to public land, and this is connected to lack of information regarding the land that can be taken away just because there's not enough information. A fourth element that has to do with reorganization of land. In Colombia, we have making a decision of securing the land as a form of really give an answer to urban expansion. And there's a fifth element that has been discussed, and we haven't discussed it enough, to really establish regulations regarding land grabbing. From Colombia, we really want to take advantage of this space to invite you to our second conference on agrarian farm. It's going to take place in Colombia in February 24 to 27 next year. This second conference, after 2 decades, the first one in Brazil, is really trying to give an answer to all these challenges. Access to land not only implies the possibility to produce food, but to also to meet the rights of the people that live in these territories. It also about guaranteeing the access to the rights of environment, to food security. So we're really looking forward many participants of people around the world that really can give us an understanding of what's the role of agrarian reform and other distributive policies, where we're actually facing a lot of the challenges. Right now, are the states equipped enough and committed enough to guarantee access to food, to land, where there's a lot of pressure on these resources? I think this is a really needed debate, including the participation of you in Cartagena next year, that we really want to together work with the FAO and other agencies to understand a better way of how to give an answer to this land grabbing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jhenifer, for your reflections. I think very important also, to highlight the role of public policies, and thanks again also for sharing specifically on what is happening in Colombia, and the close relationship also between land distribution and peace. And for the commitment to Colombia or to host the second conference on agrarian reform and rural development next year is in a way to also kind of get renewed commitment to states of actually tackling those issues and to put in place policies that are respectful and support the rights of rural people. I saw that some of you have started also to make comments and to ask questions in the chat. I invite you to do this already now. We are taking taking all those for the next session. But before moving to that, I would like to invite Mamadou Ballo to share some thoughts from a different geographical perspective from West Africa. So Mamadou Ballo represents the West African Network of Peasants and Agricultural Producers, where he serves as a program manager for agroecology, and he's also the coordinator of the Alliance for Agroecology in West Africa, which is a platform composed of farmers' organization, research institutes, and university, NGOs, and social movements. And Mamadou Ballo, please, we invite you to share your thoughts and maybe also share a bit about the land struggles for land and agroecology in West Africa. Yes, please go ahead, Mamadou.
Oui, très bien. Bonjour tout le monde. Excusez-moi un peu, je suis dans une salle où il y a un peu de bruit.
Good morning, everyone. I'm in a room where there's a lot of noise, so I'm sorry for my audio. I hope that you can hear me well. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mamadou. All is good, all fine.
Okay, let's go. Donc, justement, bon, vraiment, je crois que nous sommes au cœur du problème.
So I think that we're here at the heart of the issue of the sustainable food system and the fight and the struggle against hunger at a secular level. And it's an issue that pertains the whole of humanity. And here we're facing a big struggle in this sense. And in the African context, we have a tradition also that must be considered of food security and autonomy policy at every level, at a seeds level, crop level, land work and employment as well. And we also have very, in this sense, we have allies that work with us. We work with Latin America, with Europe, and we have allies and organizations that provide tools in order to continue in this fight. And here, where I live, Burkina Faso, and I am part of a farmers association of farm workers and in cooperation with other organizations. And we work with different organizations that have shown results on a bill Sorry, we're having difficulties with the audio of origin. And yes, we continue struggling and fighting for the rights of the land, and we work in this sense for many years. It's an ongoing battle. And we've discussed, we've worked, we've cooperated with authorities And since 2023, up to February 2025, we were able to achieve a new agricultural law bill in order to favor small farmers in this fight. This fight it's classified in 7 stages. We're in the documenting stage for the General Assembly that it's being organized. This is a transition, and they will analyze this document, and then we will continue with the reflections together in the organization in order to prepare new dispositions and be able to present to the Parliament and to the Parliament members, to the PMs, so that the questions that we will be posing is, what should the real role in the centralization of land or centralized around power, land, and territories is going to be? We would like to also know what's the role of these new bills and regulations in decentralizing land ownership. And we would also like to know if it's possible to have an improvement on the situation in the different municipalities and regions of the country in order to continue and uphold the traditions and the traditional laws of each people and each culture. The third question that we want to know is, at a local level, what is the perspective on the lands included in the project? What are the plans to restore soils? For instance, that's one of the things that we want to know. And also, what's going to happen to the rural communities that work with different cooperatives and organizations? Also, at a municipal level, how can the land ownership be managed? And sorry, we're having again audio difficulties. Now, regarding land usage, what's the perspective in the cooperation project? The other question or another recommendations, for the project for the General Assembly, the legislative transition is how to guarantee the right to land access and have a public discussion on what is exactly disposed on this bill, what exactly is found in this new law, and so that all these measures and that all the measures that are taken in order to avoid exactly what we're discussing today, which is land capture and have small farmers as a priority. We also need to know what the plan around decentralization within the framework of this new bill and legislation, those ecosystemic services and land services at the core of it. As well as land management. I'm sorry because my connection is not solid and audio is coming in and out. Also, there's a component regarding mining. It's important that lands are managed in a proper way and not be massively concentrated in the hands of few, and we will give recommendations on how to, little by little, advance and achieve this transition and achieve an equalitarian, equanimous distribution of land. Another recommendation is within the legal framework. It's important to set guarantees to make sure that there's transparency. So transparency, data sharing in the different territories is going to be crucial. So that way we can have real data in order to guarantee traceability and monitoring of land usage, in order to guarantee land rights, because this type of data is very easily manipulated and faked. If they're online, if there's transparency, if there's a system in place in order to avoid false information, false data being input into the system, this is very important. In Mali's case, as I was saying, we have countries that are partners. And we work together with small producers in and out of the country. And we've seen since 2017 a regression in terms of laws that have been adopted at an agricultural level. And also, in order to continue with this fight of decentralization of land usage. And it's important to safeguard this framework. And so this bill is going to recognize and acknowledge the rights of land usage and landowners and farmers. So we have at a national and local scales this guarantee to have access to land access rights. So we have this commission that conducts all the litigation, all the lobbying in order to cement this bill project. So it's been a very complex process, but what we've seen is that there are solutions. We also work in developing different models for land usage in the territories that need to be acknowledged regarding decentralization of territories and the creation of local institutions where we can continue working on, and there's an enormous process on that front in the framework of territorial decentralization. And all of this for small land workers and small farmers, so that conflict mediation can be achieved, and so that producers and small producers don't lose time. They can guarantee the territories and local territories are favored and become a priority. And there's also within the bill, or there's a project where we're going to do rearrangement or reorganization of the territories in order to guarantee the rights of these small territories, such as the case of Mali. Of land usage in small territories.
Chala où des femmes produisaient du soja, puisqu'elles n'ont pas droit à la terre, elles ne travaillent que pour leur mari.
Also,
Et avec vraiment un grand plaidoyer.
with small producers that didn't have access to land. So we're doing a lot of advocacy with our partners in order to ensure them that they're going to have territories or they're going to have land to work on. And we've always had the support of institutions, of allies. We work with donations that have made things easier. This is the case of Mali. Now, in case of Togo.
Mamadou, my apologies. Mamadou, Ballo? Just for the sake of time, we're a bit running over time. Is it okay if I share the video on Togo in the chat that you shared before so that people can say? But so that we can, apologies, but I think, thank you very much for those insights from West Africa, specifically from Burkina Faso and Mali, and the policies that are being developed and the policy reforms that are happening. West Africa was one of the target areas of the big land grab that happened after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. In our report, we haven't come across West Africa, but obviously that doesn't mean that there are no challenges in the areas that are not. So we kind of, I think Luciana made it clear, like we're looking at a small part and only at the very big landowners, but a lot of things are happening also at a smaller scale and at a local scale, and I think literally no area in the world is excluded from those dynamics. So as we receive further questions in the chat, which is great, I would just like to invite Shalmali, Guttal to just maybe just highlight a bit again these links also of how this questions that we are, and this complex picture is also linked to questions of finance. So Shalmali is a senior analyst at Focus of the Global South, which is an activist think tank in Asia that provides analysis and builds alternative for just socioeconomic and political change. And she is a longtime activist and a dear friend. And Shalmali, please, you have the floor, and we're looking forward to hearing your reflections.
Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me? Am I clear and audible? Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear. We can hear you perfectly well. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. So first, I want to thank all the people who have joined this webinar today, because it shows how much interest there is in this issue. And my hope is that those of you who are posting questions on the chat and who have joined this webinar, that we can all work together to continue this work, because as Philip and Luciana explained, that we were only able to with the material available to us, be able to gather information and do analysis on a small aspect of what is happening. But a lot more needs to be done in terms of resource land, marine areas, water concentration, and we need to work together on this. So I just want to say that at the beginning. Now, let me add some points on the issue of finance and the relationship between finance capital, financialization, and the concentration of land, water, natural resources, nature, and territories. No? So one thing is that the policies that enable financialization were set in place quite a long time ago. They're not new policies, no? But it was like a portal that was open and finance capital was enabled in. So even if we go back to just 40 years ago, from 1980s onwards, with the imposition of structural adjustment programs and austerity measures, and then the expansion of neoliberalism, what we saw was not only privatization and trade and investment liberalization, but very importantly, we saw the liberalization of finance capital, which basically meant that finance capital on its own and or through trade and investment agreements was able to go in and out of countries. And of course, finance capital in the form of different firms was able to invest. Along with this were also policies for deregulation, which meant taking away the controls and disciplines on finance capital. And then following that deregulation was also then re-regulation. So taking away any disciplines and any rules and regulations on finance capital for investments on land, but also then on labor rights, on the environment, and so on. And then crafting of new regulations that then were market friendly and were finance capital friendly and were corporate friendly. So this paved the way for financialization that we see. And monetize, the finance capital was already central on the question of governance of land, water, and territories. Just some quick examples was, for example, in 1980s and 1990s, the World Bank and all the donors, in fact, pushed very hard the issue of monetization in Laos. In Laos, PDR, a small country in the Mekong region, and a big issue in trying to monetize the Lao economy was to get rural people to take their land and put their land in as collateral in banks, so that banks would then use that land for further collateral and so on. And then people would then start using money rather than barter or credit schemes that were locally developed. The Asian Development Bank, right? I mean, in the 1990s, even developed a system of what they call water trading rights, where fisher people and farm people sharing the same river could actually parcel out the amount of rights that they had to water that they were sharing, and then trade that with each other, and find some kind of financial, compensation for that. And these were communities, who'd been living and sharing these territories for a very long time. Similarly, we saw in the Asian Development Bank push the idea of group collateral in East Timor, when East Timor was doing a financial, was going through post-conflict reconstruction and transition in the 2000s. Many years before that, Cambodia went through that and again faced, these microcredit schemes, microfinance schemes, which were the beginning of putting land into these agriculture promotion banks, starting microfinance and so on. If we look at then come to 1997 and the Asian financial crisis, at that time, a huge amount of land was inaccessible to rural communities in Thailand, because this land was what they call non-performing assets land. This was land that had been used as collateral, and when the banks collapsed and investment firms collapsed, all this farmland and forest land, much of which was in wetlands, also became non-performing assets land and was locked up. And I think I would be most remiss when I'm talking about financialization to not talk about what the World Bank started to do with the market-assisted land reform. So instead of actually promoting agrarian reform and redistribution, what they were doing was bringing land into the markets and making these sort of land markets a willing buyer, willing seller, but more important, making what they call land banks, where rural communities, especially the rural poor, would be asked to take out loans. And then with those loans, then they would get into debt traps. And, I think many of you know this story, this very tragic story only too well. So how shall I say, the move towards financialization and the central role of finance capital in land and territories and water and nature and oceans has been going on, the stage was set more than 20 years ago. But of course, since the financial crisis of 2008, as Luciana so well explained, we've seen that finance capital has stepped in and taken a much more significantly, forward and central role in not only the way land is used and controlled and shared and profits are made from it, but also in the governance of land. And this, as an activist researcher, I would say is an advanced form of global capitalism, where capital is constantly looking for new things or new ways, that it can create profits and so on. And our report, Lords of the Land, actually outlines many ways in which global capitalism has sort of used different vehicles, different mechanisms, different mediations to be able to convert land and territories into into financial assets. And so I won't repeat any of that. But I think one very important aspect of financialization is the way financialization, which is really basically the conversion of wealth into financial commodities and trade, and the conversion and putting into global markets what we would call elements of the real economy. And then a significant involvement, of course, of financial actors and financial corporations, whether they're pension funds or hedge funds or insurance companies or asset managers, into taking what is real wealth of the world that sustains people and communities and sustains life, and taking that and then putting that into financial markets. But the profits and wealth that are, how shall we say, generated through financialization, they are alienated from the real and the real and the productive economy. And they also have very severe ramifications for the ability of communities and rural people all over the world to be able to build any kind of just and dignified life for themselves. And this is especially true of women, who are even more excluded from financial processes for a number of social, cultural reasons, and of course, the kinds of infrastructural inequalities that we already see because of gender. Now, all I want to say here, moving forward on how we tackle this, is that we've got to understand financialization as it manifests. Now, financialization is happening in land, yes, but financialization of land is closely, of course, related to the financialization of food, financialization of nature, as with ecosystem services. What are ecosystem services? Basically, nature is not, putting any, selling its services and goods to us. There are natural balances that are there in ecosystems. There are, natural cycles that balance our ecosystems. Now, when financial firms come in and start converting these into financial assets and calling them, naming them into services and putting a price on them, not only does it actually put nature into the market, but it also divides the communities that have been nurturing the ecosystems that have been protecting these ecosystems and biodiversity. And across Asia, across Africa, across Latin America, and I would venture to say probably it's happening in the wealthier countries as well, communities, peoples who have shared the same ecosystems, fisherfolk, people on the land, herders, nomadic people, cropland growers, forest people, and agricultural workers have been divided. They've been divided by this particular push of global capitalism and the firms that are behind it. And financialization has made it very easy because it's difficult to track, difficult to monitor. It's also difficult to then get accountability for financial firms, what they're doing. And, one of the worst outcomes of financialization is speculation, not just in land, but it's been happening in food for a long time. It's happening increasingly when we saw how the carbon markets at one time collapsed, and then they came back again. The red market collapsed and then came back again. So basically, the value of life, the value of nature, the value of life-sustaining elements of nature and life-sustaining elements of human ability are now being extracted into financial commodities. And this is not going to stop unless our governments take a very firm hand and say stop. We've all agreed that, this kind of, land concentration, the concentration of territories, this doesn't happen magically on its own. It's human beings, it's human actions, it's human policies that have made this happen. And it's we as human beings and as citizens of countries, we need to talk to our governments. We need to make sure that our governments enact the kinds of policies that are needed to be able to stop financialization, to be able to curb financial speculation and this kind of incursion of finance capital into land. And I think for this, my big hope is that as we move forward, whether it's in the Food and Agriculture Organization whether it's in other fora, definitely in the e-card, which is going to happen, definitely in e-card, which will happen next year in Colombia, that the issue of fiscal policies, fiscal regulation, and disciplining finance capital takes center stage. Because we cannot have agrarian reform anymore if we have a market-oriented land redistribution system. Redistribution means not only taking land and parceling it out, but it means going back to the concepts of commons, to the concept of stewardship, to the concept of sharing, which continues to stay despite financialization. And we can't have a new, paradigm for agrarian reform unless we discipline finance capital. And here I would go back to some, Luciana already mentioned some of the recommendations that we have, but a very strong recommendations there are on the issue of fiscal policy, on progressive taxation, on stopping tax havens, on stopping illicit financial flows, and basically on making corporations and finance capital pay for the damage they've done. And pay for the damage not in terms of offset, but pay for the damage in terms of real penalties, in terms of reparations, in terms of actual taxation for the harm that they're doing. So progressive taxation means that any rate of taxation must be equivalent to the amount of wealth that's concentrated, but also to the amount of harm that's been created. And along with this, a very important aspect of fiscal policies is to take nature, to take land, to take territories, to take oceans, to take biodiversity out of markets. These are elements of life. They're not commodities. They should not be commodified. They should never have been commodified. And so we need a very strong push from the people of this world, to do this and to say, okay, we need to address the climate issues differently. No more nature for debt swaps. Debt has to be addressed for what it's worth in terms of its extractivism. I mean, look at the way third world debt has moved. We've never come out of the debt crisis because of the World Bank's programs on highly indebted poor countries initiative, and because of the Paris Club of Cartels. Indebted countries continue to stay in debt because their lands, their territories, their waters, their oceans are continue to be, how shall we say, terrains from which value is being extracted sort of, relentlessly by these financial firms and extremely wealthy investors. So trying to mix all of these different challenges that we face into one sort of false solution of financial market is a very big danger. And my hope to all our friends in Colombia is that e-card will address the issue of financialization and the need for fiscal regulation very succinctly and very, in a very central way. And my request to everybody here who is in any way working on the Food and Agriculture Organization or any of these global governance mechanisms is to see financialization for what it is, call it out, and insist on fiscal re-regulation and fiscal policies that deliver real justice and equality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shalmali. I think over the course of the webinar, the picture has become more complex, but I think that's part of what is important to unpack it. And we have started a bit also to see like what is happening, or what some at least elements for public policies, for measures to addressing also on these issues around financial regulation, and the regulation and accountability of financial actors that Shalmali just mentioned. We are quite into time. I'm mindful of time. We have received some questions in the chat, and what I will propose is that we take those. For now, I have to try to club them a bit, and then I will ask maybe first Luciana and then everybody else of the speakers so far, just to briefly address those, whatever you kind of want to intervene, and just make sure that we have keep some time for our final reflections by Carlos Duarte. So, but maybe just to recap, I think we have one block of questions that is a bit around the question of marine and coastal lands and how they are kind of part of all of this, and also the question of how kind of small-scale fisheries communities in particular are also affected by those. Also, like the last question, a bit like linking those to these kind of more green grabs, which are then not only green grabs but also blue grabs. There was a comment also about northern countries being like targets, like these dynamics not being exclusive to the global south. There was one question about the FAO and I guess institutions in general, to what extent they can be allies. Another question that I have was about policies to limit foreign investment in land, and also how like we can have cross-learning from kind of what has worked in agriculture. Can that work also for the housing sector? And then a question about also kind of how to kind of what can be done also in countries where these actors are headquartered in terms of research, and I guess also in terms of mobilization. And then there was one question also that kind of asked more specifically how fiscal policies can contribute to more just food systems. I'm pretty sure each of those questions, we could discuss at length to do justice. But I think maybe what we can do today is just kind of to give some spotlights. And I don't know, Luciana, maybe you want to go first, because also some of the questions were directly related to the research, and then maybe the others can come in and.
Okay. Well, about the question of protections in sea areas, I posted there that in the photo of the 10 landowners, we see a rise in conservation projects with Blue Carbon and Manulife. And in the case of Blue Carbon, there is a notable emphasis on coastal and marine conservations in the agreements with Caribbean countries, for example. And I shared the link that is they have in their web page, Blue Carbon, that they mention with the Bahamas some of these conservation projects. Then in the case of someone asked about policies to transnational landowners and putting a stop. There are some examples of laws in Argentina, US, Brazil, and Australia that are laws that limit the amount of land that a transnational landowner can have. These laws have some problems. The main problem is the way the transnational landowners invest. That is with opaque structures of ownership and subsidiaries and joint ventures. This laws has this problem that they cannot. It's difficult to identify this. So it's better. The thing we found in our research is that it's better that having this type of laws than none. But in every country, the main problem is that. So that takes us to the aim of this research we share, that we have to have more and more information about land investments and financialization. And that's it for now. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Luciana. Also, I didn't say this at the outset because there was also a question about, the geographical distribution. I just wanted to point out also that today, together with the report, we also published a map. So where you can see like where are the kind of top 10 transnational landowners based and where do they own lands or own or control land to the extent that we were able to find out. So they are on the website as well of FIAN, and I'm sure also Focus. So I think you can see that. There are obviously regions that are not present, which is not because we have excluded them, but like in our methodology, we didn't come across those areas. For instance, the MENA region, because somebody asked about that, we haven't come across a lot of there. I mean, we have the UAE there as like the host country or the headquarter of this big company. But just to say that it's in a way, if you want, it's as we said, it's a photography, it's a partial picture, but I still it's kind of one contribution. So I wonder if, like, from the other speakers, Ching, Shalmali, also, or Jhenifer, Ballo, if you want to kind of, just take on any.
One more thing about that, the last thing you said, Philip, of the geography, that Stefan mentioned the investments in the global north, and in this photo we have lots of companies that invest in global north, like in Australia, US, and Europe, and the amount of land is less than 20%, in contrast of the amount of land invested in the global south. That I think we mentioned before, but just to reinforce.
Yeah, thanks, Luciana, for that addition. Ching, I don't know, do you want, I mean, you responded to some questions also in the chat, but maybe you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and thank you to all the speakers for such insightful comments and examples that you've brought. I think what this really strikes me, even in the kind of spaces that I'm in, and hearing the same thread and narrative threads running through all the different, whether you're working on trade issues, on finance issues, on climate, on biod, land, food and agriculture, there is this increasing focus around how some of the structural issues, right, cause some, whether it's biodiversity destruction, climate change, or this increasing extractivism that impacts on how land is used and who controls the land. And I think it definitely brings to me, and from what Shalmali was saying as well, the need for us, that work in this to really make these cross linkages across the different spaces, right? So, for example, there's strong calls for IFA reform, international financial architecture reform at the moment. And this would include things like tax justice and debt reform, and how the IFIs, the World Bank, the IMF operate. And the World Bank in particular, has a lot to answer for in terms of what it's done with land and land markets, right? So I think, that as we see these increasing linkages of how finance impacts all the spaces of biodiversity, of climate, of land, we also need then to address the root structural causes of this. So that's one point I wanted to make, and it would be great, to have more collaborations across this in that regard. And the second is something that I kind of alluded to also in what I ended with in my presentation, that I really think that we need to center, rights and justice in all of this, right? Because land and the stewardship of land with indigenous peoples, with smallholder farmers, with fishers, and of course, and marine and coastal territories, right? absolutely important that land rights to resources, to land, and community-based approaches come back to the heart of any of the policy decisions, and including whether it's for climate and biodiversity action, because we've seen this increasing growth of green grabbing in the name of environmental causes, right? But we need to then recognize rights of communities and indigenous peoples, including helping them to map and defend their own land. These have been shown to be very on-the-ground experiences that have had real impact, for example, in my own country, Malaysia, for indigenous peoples to assert their customary rights. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ching. And I'm sure we could continue discussing, and lots of important issues being raised there. One of the things that I take away, and maybe this is also something that Jhenifer can take on the way in Colombia as they move to the ICARD conference, a big also request to better include small-scale fisheries perspective in there, and these connections between blue grabs, green grabs, fisher territories, be it coastal or inland fisheries or marine fisheries. I think also the location in the fact that the conference will take place in Cartagena, that is an ocean city, it's a fisher city. So maybe this is also, a strong sign there, and something definitely to be developed further. Being mindful about
Philip?
Time. Yes, Luciana, very short, and then I would give the floor to...
Philip?
Yes.
This is Shalmali.
Yes, Shalmali.
Sorry, I just got a message from you with that you thought I dropped out. No, I was trying to send a message, respond to Vijayan's comment, but I think I sent it to one person instead of sending it to the whole chat. Sorry about it. But can I just add that point in here very quickly?
Yes, please, and then we can give the floor to Carlos. Please, Shalmali.
Yeah, what I just was saying is that 2 or 3 things. One is that the issue of taxation is especially important when we look at the kind of regressive taxation and the flat taxations that has been imposed on small-scale food providers, especially when they are fishers and peasants and herders, compared, and also land taxes, compared to the big firms who get away with through various tax havens and tax loopholes and so on. So I just wanted to emphasize that this whole issue of fiscal policies and taxation is a much more complex issue than just saying, we need to reform the tax policies, because here we really need to get the real experiences and the lived experiences of those small-scale food producers and providers from all the different sectors, and the communities and indigenous people, and also among them women, to see what are fiscal policies doing to them, and how can tax and taxation systems actually help and move us towards food sovereignty. So these include a lot of regulatory issues, which we don't have time to go into here, but I'm hoping that we will continue this dialogue in other spaces. The other thing I want to say is on the issue of the blue economy and blue grabbing. Yes, blue grabbing is increasing. We're just certainly seeing it a lot in Asia, but in other regions as well. And just as the green economy was launched by UNEP, was that in one of the, I think, Rio Plus 20, blue economy was also launched, and there have been lots of mobilizations against the blue economy. And then there are more and more initiatives now to actually extract value from water bodies. And I think we need to remember that land masses are shaped significantly by water bodies, and at the base of all water bodies is land. And as far as finance capital goes, all these are spaces for extraction. So my hope is, and my appeal is, that all of us working in different sectors can put our hands together and put our minds and feet together, and we collectively monitor and track and document the way land, water, marine areas, other resources, biodiversity are being concentrated, and that we build public pressure on our governments and on international and multilateral agencies to stop what's happening. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Shalmali. I think important additions. And now, I mean, just looking at the time and also, I would like to, invite Carlos just to share some reflections of what you have taken away from the discussion. So Carlos Duarte, who is, I think you are now the Chair-Rapporteur of the United Nations Working Group on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas, which is a special procedure of the Human Rights Council. And apart from that, he's a professor and at the Institute for International Studies at the Javeriana University of Cali, and he also works a lot with rural movements in Colombia. So, Carlos, thank you very much for joining, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments, your reflections on the discussion so far.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias a FIAN y a Global Sur.
Well, thank you so much to FIAN and Focus Global South for this invitation or for this great report. So I also want to thank Luciana, Philippe, Sophia, and Shalmali for writing this report to really update all the data regarding this subject, because I have 7 themes that I think have been crucial throughout the report and what we discussed today. The first one has to do with the updating of data and the analysis, and that relationship between land financialization, land grabbing, and extractivism. So I believe in that sense the report is really important, because we're able to see not only global data through FAO database and some research that we were tracking this, but it also focused on the entities, on land grabbing entities. I want to also think about if really what we are going through is connected to the neoliberal dynamic, or if we're experiencing, especially after the pandemic, a new phenomenon, a phenomenon where national entities are very worried for full sovereignty in their countries, and especially for this multipolarity at the global level that really has affected food sovereignty, access to resources. So I don't know if we can still call it neoliberalism, or we should maybe do a deeper reading about it, because we were used to think that land possession was going to what the land produces, but this report is very clear that at the end of the day, land grabbing is becoming really important. And second, this relationship between access to land, poverty, and also violence, it is within the report. So it's how can we correlate these different phenomena with the global data regarding hunger, that they're still increasing, and we're also we've been going through it for a long time, food paradox, where people that have feel hunger the most are the same that also produce food. So this relationship is really important to start exploring it. This phenomenon that the report describes regarding these connections on food. Third point, and I believe it really connects with the exercise of Colombia. it really has to do with this idea, this idea of neoliberalism, that it was something obsolete, something from the past. And what we had to do is it was to reordering the territory. In the contributions that our working group received through 2024, we received a lot of contributions regarding Article 17 of the Declaration of farm workers, people that work in rural areas, that it has to do with land access, and also the clause 6 of Article 17, again with agrarian reform. So I believe this report really highlights that agrarian reform is important in a context of very strong inequality when it comes to land access. A fourth element has to do with green grabbing. This is really interesting because in the working group, we find that it's important to talk about the environmental dimension of farm workers, and we found that it has been difficult. At the COP16 in Colombia, it was difficult that in the environmental narrative of the state, that the farm workers that has their own declaration, and it is a subject of the HG, an effective subject of the HG. There's a lot of prevention. So we see how this green land grabbing comes with negationism, so that the farm workers are not included in the global agreement regarding biodiversity. A fifth element, I believe that data is an important subject of continuity, of keeping them updated. Sometimes there's no systematization, so the work of Focus and FIAN is really important because it really makes us think about how we're gonna keep on having tracking measures to these patterns and other things that are also relevant. For example, the expansion of cities and land that have a more focus on resources, and also in Latin American entities, faith-based entities or religious entities, that they're also going through a process of land grabbing. A sixth element, I also believe, is really important to really think about systemic violence connected to this phenomenon of land grabbing, inequality, and extractivism. Because we've seen that through the last years, more than 80% of killings of human rights defenders, environmental rights defenders, it has to do, they're immersed in interests of transnational interests, mining interests, and land exploitation, especially in Latin America and Colombia. And we're really trying to see how to give an answer to this issue of criminalization, persecution of defenders. So lastly, it is also important to mention that this phenomenon around land and the new vision of agrarian reform is crucial for us as the working group. We're gonna make a call to contributions regarding access to land, especially from the focus of farm workers. So let's not forget that those that own the land but that work in rural areas are also exposed to precarization, even slavery in some states. So I really thank a lot to Global South and FIAN, and from our working group, we're gonna keep on supporting these really important spaces from the civil society and the academy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. And we are just at the end of the meeting. So thank you very much, Carlos. Also to link it to the work, I think the establishment of this working group also is important, and I think you have an important role to play also in these discussions. And I'm happy to see that you have already taken it up. We have opened up a big picture today, and still it feels like we have only scratched the surface. Definitely, more discussions are needed. I hope that today's event has, been a contribution to this kind of discussion. We have mentioned several times the International Conference on Agrarian Reform, Rural Development next February in Colombia. That kind of gives us an important horizon, I think, also, and a different important space. However, also, I think it's important to remember there are also other processes going on around financing for development, a big conference coming up in about a month. And also, around these issues around fiscal policies. And there is, as you might know, ongoing discussions around a global tax convention. And also not to forget that, and this week also, some of our friends are fighting also to finally get a treaty to regulate the transnational activities of corporations. But all of these, of course, are those are only the more international spaces. We know that struggles are going on everywhere in the territories, and that those are the struggles that are at the basis for everything else. I would like to thank again all the speakers, Luciana, Ching, Jhenifer, Mamadou, Shalmali, and Carlos. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank our interpreters for their challenging job, but helping us to have this conversation in 3 languages, and to all of you for having joined the meeting and for taking the struggle forward. Looking forward to seeing you in other spaces to continue this conversation. And thanks to all of you. Have a nice rest of the day, evening, depending on where you are. Thank you very much, and see you next time.